black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black. Culture over everything, y'all. We taking it back, black.
Welcome, folks. My name is Mark Anthony Neal, host of Left of Black. This is our special presentation series. Left of Black presents Small Talk at FHI. FHI is the Franklin Humanities Institute, which is where you are now. Shout out to the staff that's here. In support and in shooting, and of course our longtime producer and director, Eric Barstow. The Small Talk is in reference to Gil Scott-Heron's very first album, Small Talk in Harlem.
This is just like listening to a conversation being held by the many people who congregate on one of the most popular blocks in the largest area of Black America. Did you ever eat cornbread and black-eyed peas or watermelon and mustard greens? Get high as you can on Saturday night, go to church on Sunday to set things right?
Many folks think of Gil Scott-Heron as being the godfather of rap music, so it's fitting that we're going to have a conversation today that looks at the 50 years of hip-hop. And joining me is my colleague and friend, Bakari Kitwana. 1994, the rap on Gangsta Rap, which will be 29 years old, is 29 years old this year. The Hip Hop Generation in 2002. And our books were reviewed together in the Washington Post that same year. Why White Kids Love Hip Hop, 2005. Hip Hop Politics in the Obama Era in 2012, published by Third World Press, and we'll talk about that one in a moment. And most recently, writing with Rakim, his creative memoir, for lack of a better way to describe it. How you doing?
I'm good. It's good to be here.
Among other things, he's been a longtime executive director of Rap Sessions,
Right.
which we'll talk about. And he's currently
18
years. And he's currently a visiting scholar at the University of Buffalo, which is my PhD alma mater. You good?
Yes, sir. I'm listening to you.
So let me start with the big, broad question. And what's so fun about tonight, Bakari and I will talk once or twice a week. So this is like y'all are dropping in on what has been an ongoing conversation.
For like, I don't know how many years now.
But 50 years of hip hop. I want to ask you first about the date.
Yeah.
We don't talk about the date that jazz was born.
Right.
Or the date that blues was born. We don't even talk about a date that rock and roll was born, but we talk about a date in which hip hop was born. How do you feel about that date and the idea that this thing started 50 years ago?
I feel like the date thing has a lot to do with, when we first really started thinking about hip hop as an entity, and an origin story, and like what even is it? You know what I mean? You had a handful of artists who were theoreticians, and they provided a theory of what hip hop was, like what, so this is how people start saying graffiti art, breakdancing, rapping, DJing, doing the knowledge, or peace, love, unity, and having fun. That was African Bambaataa said that. And KRS-One kind of reinforced a lot of that stuff. And so as people were kind of looking back at these pioneering folks, that was one of the stories that DJ Kool Herc began to tell, and as well as his sister Cindy. It was her birthday party that they were saying was this first hip hop moment.
Then I'm noticing people's wait for particular parts of the records to dance to.
Yeah.
So I'm visual watching it. So I'm saying, so let me try something out. So all the records I have that have those breakdowns in it, some I had two, some I just had one. I said, I'm gonna do a thing called the merry-go-round.
You
tonight.
made it up?
Yes.
Take this mind of mine.
I don't have no headphones. I have to know my record. I have to incorporate myself in the record.
Can you say that again? DJs in the beginning did not have headphones.
No, I didn't have none. I didn't care. I was wanting, I want to hear this music come out of this thing right here.
Right.
You know?
But of course, even in the history, you see it wasn't the first party that Herc had thrown.
Okay.
So there's clearly that history. And he, in his own narrative, he talks about the evolution even of his sound system and stuff like that. So I think that in some ways, it is just a nice kind of folk story, right? that makes hip hop, a manageable concept,
And let's talk about that for a moment, right? Because I don't remember anyone celebrating the 10th anniversary of hip hop, or even the 20th anniversary. I mean, I remember before I even thought about anniversaries in regard to hip hop. Greg Tate did a piece called on 30 years of hip hop.
Okay.
Right, and that's the first time I ever even thought about an origin story in that way, even knowing the quote unquote origin story.
Right.
How much do you think of what we've seen this year and going into next year is largely commercial driven?
I mean, I think some of it is commercial driven, but I also feel like, I was actually surprised by the way it kind of took on a life of its own. I feel like a lot of the stuff that I ended up like being at, doing events around, were things that sometimes were people who didn't usually do hip hop stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that some of it was, I can remember, Giuseppe Pipitone,
Right.
from Italian hip hop writer. He called me up at one point as we were coming into the anniversary, and he was like, "Hey, I got this thing." He got this Polaroid collection of hip hop artists. He was like, "I think I'm going to try to make it into an exhibit." And I'm like, "Man, ain't nobody gonna be like nobody." I'm like, "People gonna be." I'm like, "We've been doing this stuff for years. Like, this is another year that we're doing the same stuff we've been doing." And those of us who are in the know that it just
Right.
happens to be 50 years, and on we go. But yeah, I mean, it kind of took on a life of its own, and I think people started, particularly around the 50th anniversary of the thing that was at Yankee Stadium, the big they had a big concert.
Right?
Yeah. So
that was streamed all day.
So like it was like all of a sudden that was happening. Other people were doing stuff, and then I started getting people calling me to book artists. And as I started to call people, everybody was booked. So that's when it was real to me. Like, oh shit,
right,
really,
right.
this shit is really taking off. You know what I'm saying? Like, I remember we did a thing with the Locks in Pittsburgh, and then with Jasiri's One Hood organization, they hosted the Locks in Pittsburgh with the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust. And I remember at one point there was somebody else was trying to steal the Locks from this event. And so, but we had already locked, it was already locked in.
down.
So yeah, so it was a done deal. But then there were other people, other events I was doing. I was trying to get Rakim to do stuff. I was trying to get Talib to do stuff. I was trying to get Bun B. And like everybody that I would call was booked. And I was like, oh, wow. Like this is something else. This is something else now. So I feel like it just kind of took on a life of its own. I was really surprised. I was surprised because I wasn't expecting it. I felt like we've been recognizing hip hop every day.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
For like the last 30 something years, right? And now other people, and I feel like that's what really kind of solidified it. People outside of the culture, I felt, were doing things. They were doing
They wanted to
exhibits.
talk
They were,
about it,
they were
yeah.
doing art exhibits. They were, so people wanted to talk about it. And it almost became almost like, I feel like social media has changed the landscape of Black culture in so many different ways. One of them is the ways in which people gravitate to what they think is in. You know what I mean? Like if something happens and people feel like they don't have a post on it on social media, then they're somehow not, on top of things. And I felt like this kind of took on that type of a vibe, but then also really people outside the culture. I mean, I did an event out in Southampton at an art center that I mean, I drove past this place growing up like a million times and never thought there was a place that we were going. And so I ended up at this place with the guy, oh my goodness, the brother who Martin Lawrence plays him in the film House Party.
Kiss my ass. You want to take my equipment and leave me? No, I ain't going for it. No. What else can I do? Come here. Kick that bitch to the curb and let me ride with my equipment. I'm the DJ, man.
Right.
The
The
DJ.
character that is based
The
on.
DJ.
Yeah.
It's DJ Bilal.
Bilal.
So yeah, so it's me, DJ Bilal, and a sister named Half Pint, who's an MC and now like a vice principal of Roosevelt High School where Chuck D went. And so we're sitting out there. It's just like surreal. Like we hearing the crickets in the background. And I'm like, we're sitting here talking about hip hop, and then they did a screening of House Party after the talk out in like the yard area. So it was just surreal. I did another thing at a institution in the Dallas African American Museum, and that was also very interesting. But yeah, and they had like a whole day things. So it was like I was doing events in places that I never did events.
Right.
You know? Or I would get calls from people and be like, hey, we're gonna do something on the 50th, we're gonna do this 50th anniversary hip hop thing. So the interesting thing of it though, Mark, was some people were really hard going for the date, a specific date in August. And then other people were just like, we just wanna do something within this 50th year. So it's been very interesting. It's been very interesting.
You are a year younger than, or at least you were born the year after I was.
That's right.
Well, and that makes you 57.
57, that's right.
When was your first awareness of this hip hop thing?
Yeah.
Growing up in Long Island.
I mean, I would say definitely the earliest memories of going to hip hop parties was 78, 79 when I was an interesting thing about this, you asked me about Long Island, was in the midst of getting prepared for this thing, I started talking to some of these local DJs that I knew growing up, like hitting these guys up, like, and so they started taking me through some of the history. It was very interesting because if you'll remember, a lot of the early hip hop was really DJ driven.
Yep.
So like they knew more about the history of Long Island hip hop than I even did, and I often find that's the case when I'm really digging. I'll call the DJs. Davey D or Oliver Wang, because they digging through the crates for real. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, so I think 78, 79, I can remember going like Battle of the DJs. And so I had called some of those guys up to be like, because I was trying to remember the names of some of the crews. And so yeah, I would say those were the earliest memories, 78, 79. But then musically, the way hip hop really started for us was, again, this DJ party culture. And I trace one of my earliest hip hop memories to my older sister. She got married in I'm trying to remember what year. It was a year before or a couple of years before Sugar Hill Gang.
Right.
And at that party, I remember we were dancing to the Chic, the disco group. Chic had the song Good Times.
Good times.
Good times.
And I mean, and that's what hip hop was. Hip hop was these familiar songs we already knew that now somebody was rapping over. Yeah. So those are some of the. I remember some of the Cheryl Lynn. Cheryl Lynn had that song Encore.
Encore.
And
84. Yeah.
Was that 84?
84.
Yeah. That was one of the beats that Rakim talked about rapping over when we worked on the book and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Opening bar.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah. So those are some of the early. I mean, and again, Long Island, like, Bismarcky was from not far from where I grew up. Rakim was from not far from where I grew up. So some of the artists when I talked to some of the older DJs, they were already circulating amongst them, but they were a little bit older than me.
Right.
So like I wasn't able to get out the house yet. So they talked about some of the artists that were circulating as far out as Bridgehampton, Southampton, East Hampton, even before my memory.
You went to the University of Rochester. Talk a little bit about the crew of folks.
Yeah.
Because it really is a fascinating story in terms of all of these black folks who ended up at the University of Rochester, late 80s, early 90s, right, who go on to do some amazing things.
Yeah, I mean, I think I went to Rochester with Tracy Sharpley Whiting, Tabidi Lewis, Scott Brown, and then Rick Kittles was at Rochester Institute of Technology, and another brother named Bruce Boone, who went on. He works with the NBA, connected to the Knicks, but we end up at Rochester, and there's a network of folks when we get there who are very concerned about retention. Often universities are concerned about retention, but they're concerned about it from the university establishment. These were students that were concerned about retention. And so they were very, they would pull you to the side and talk to you about, courses to take and just different strategies for kind of getting through. One of those guys was a man named Derek Reeves. And Derek went on to be one of Cornell West's students. And so my first consciousness of Cornell West was because of him. He would be walking around with Prophecy Deliverance.
So and that's hardcore, right?
Yeah.
Don't nobody know nothing about no Prophecy Deliverance.
No, he was walking around with Prophecy. Literally.
That's the first book. That's Cornell's first book.
Yeah, he was literally walking around with it. So it was that, and then he was the first person that I knew that was taking courses by Eugene Genovese, the historian who wrote the book Roll Jordan Roll, and he was talking about the life of people who were enslaved, and so I started taking courses with him. You had to be signed into these classes. You were undergraduate. You basically taking a graduate seminar. So me and Tracy Sharpley Whiting and Scott Brown.
Who's now a vice provost at Vanderbilt.
That's right. She's at Vanderbilt. Scott is a historian who was at UCLA. He's now at Howard.
Right. Yeah. Wrote a great book on
the
Karinga's
US organization.
Movement.
Yeah. So he's working on a big project on funk. So we started taking these classes. And the other thing that they would talk to us about was taking classes together. And to not compete negatively with each other, in terms of hiding information but to compete because it would make you smarter. And so that's what we would do. And Tracy was the worst because she would get her papers done 2 months. And we're all at the 11th hour still sitting there. But it was just interesting because she's still like that. She was just very, I'm getting this done now. I'm not waiting. I'm not fooling around. And it was interesting because, Tracy was also the one who was ahead of the curve in terms of pushing us in our gender consciousness. I mean, we were sophomores. Tracy started an organization called the Black and Hispanic Women's Alliance. And the first person they brought to campus was Bell Hooks. That's how I met Bell. Tracy had the vision to bring her to campus. There was another woman that was involved with that organization named, trying to remember the other sister's name. It was a couple of other sisters. They all doing amazing work, but they didn't go into academia. Yeah. So that was kind of the landscape. Tabidi Lewis later on wrote a book called Balls of the New School. Another professor we had then was a woman named Tiffany Patterson, who now actually teaches at Vanderbilt. And she's one of the foremost historians of Zora Neale Hurston. And she was teaching us Zora Neale Hurston then.
Right.
That was my first introduction to Zora Neale Hurston, was in her class. I'm trying to think, Karen Fields was the head of what became the Frederick Douglass Institute. That they're now becoming a department for the first time. That was something we fought for as students. We also were all deeply immersed in speaking of apartheid, we were also deeply immersed in the South Africa anti-apartheid struggle. And that politicized a lot of us as students. So as students, we were working to make sure that the University of Rochester wasn't continuing to invest in companies that were doing business in South Africa. Interestingly, when the BDS movement started, you got people like at the federal level and at city government level, like passing laws and stuff to keep people from which is really fascinating to me that we're 30, 40 years later, the mechanisms of institutional structures swing ahead. And this is the thing that I think people don't often understand about white supremacy. White supremacy, they study their mistakes. They study their mistakes for years, and they learn and they perfect. And so that to me is just one example of the perfecting of a machinery that basically led to the end, played a significant role in the end of apartheid for people outside of South Africa here in the United States who understood, because very similar to what we're seeing now in Gaza. And Cornel West has been very articulate about this in terms of saying, look, we are a people who came through this oppression and still experience it. Who are we spiritually and morally if we don't identify with those struggles that other people are facing? So that was South Africa. That was a political awakening for us, and us as students kind of went through that journey. And it really, I would say that as much, if not more, than the Jesse Jackson campaigns of 84 and 88.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Your first book is The Rap on Gangsta Rap. It's published by Third World Press. You were working at Third World Press.
Yes, I was finishing. I wrote it at I was at Third World Press when I wrote it. I think I might have been leaving.
Yeah. How did you end up in Chicago? How did you end up in Chicago at Third World Press with Hakeem Aboudi?
Well, again, we were very active as students. Rick Kittles, who started the
DNA Black
African Ancestry.com he was at Howard, I think, at the time when he around the time he started,
Right.
but he was a student at Rochester Institute of Technology. He was either the vice president or the president of the Black Student Union, and Tabidi Boone, who I mentioned, Bruce Boone then, Bruce Boone was a big time New York City, Brooklyn ball player in high school. But they two of them were president and vice president of the Black Student Union. They bought Farrakhan one year. We would collaborate across campuses on things like that. So one year we brought Hakeem Aboudi. And the first time we brought him, I think it was 87. He had just wrote his book, Killing Memory, Seeking Ancestors. In those days, he only wore fatigues. He didn't wear suits. He just wore fatigues. He's only in his, he's just hitting his 40s. Yeah. So that was, that's how I met Hakeem. And then he came back to campus when I was a grad student. And he had, Tabidi had brought him, because Tabidi then was an undergrad.
Right.
I was one of the only students that had a car. So I was in grad school at this point. There was a brother in town that was a member of the Kawaida movement named Gerald Shaka. Okay. Gerald Shaka has been with Maulana and them out in LA, and then came back. He was from Rochester, went out there and spent years, became a part of the Kawaida movement, opened up a bookstore called Kitabu Kingdom in Rochester, and we used to go to this bookstore. I bought my first copy, which I still have, of Mao Zedong's little red book from Kitabu Kingdom, and even bought some of the books that I still own by Kwame Nkrumah. He has a book called Class Struggle that he wrote that was very influential to me. You remember one of my early emails included parts of Nkrumah's name. Yeah. That was a big influence. So Hakeem did a talk at the school, I think on a Friday, and then Saturday he did an event at the bookstore. That's right. And so I picked Hakeem up from the airport. I drove him back and forth to the hotel. You know how somebody comes to campus, you drive them around.
That was my memories of being in a Black student union in graduate school, that was the best time.
Yeah.
It's like, can you go
Yeah.
pick up? I mean, I
Yeah.
got car
Yeah.
rides with Sonia Sanchez,
Right.
Manning Marable,
Right.
Cornell
Right.
West.
Right. So yeah, so I ended up spending the weekend with Haki, and I was at the time I had previously been editing the Black Student Union newsletter. That's kind of how I started editing. Was there, and so I was talking to Haki about it, and I was talking to him about publishing, and he was like, "Well, you should just come. You should just come work with us."
Yeah.
So kind of like on the spot offered me a job, and so I finished the master's, and then I went to work in Chicago. There was something else in there I was going to tell you about. Another thing that we did was there was a brother who was a Nation of Islam minister of Rochester. Trying to remember what his name is. Oh my goodness, I can't think of what his name is right now. Ave Muhammad. Minister Ave Muhammad was his name. He had gone to University of Rochester. Again, that was a part of the network.
Right.
So we would go over to the mosque. The mosque, like, it started out like in his house in the basement or something. Like, it was just real low key. But we would be going over to his house to the mosque, and they were selling bean pods, and they had the newspapers, and they were trying to get us to join the nation. But one of the things that they did that was very important was when Farrakhan came back out and he was going to rebuild the nation after the fallout between him
Him and Worth.
and Worthy Muhammad. Yeah. He did the big thing at Madison Square Garden.
Right. 1985.
1985. So we as students, this same network of folks, organized a bus
Right.
to take 50 students to this.
We took 50 students
Yeah.
to Savior's Day
That's
same
right.
year.
The Savior's Day we took them to Madison Square Garden. And so that's where they launched the Power products. And
Right.
so, like, of course, we're on the bus talking politics and stuff. And one last story I'll tell you. Bell Hooks, now, Haki, Maulana came, this thing with Farrakhan, right? And we also had a thing, our advisor for the Black Student Union was a woman named Zozo Lair. And Zozo was the sister of Miriam Makeba.
Wow.
That's right. So when we were protesting, when we were talking about South Africa, like, we had somebody who really knew what the deal was. You know what I mean? But because Miriam Makeba had been married to Stokely, aka Kwame Ture, whenever Kwame would come to the States, he would come to Rochester to visit the sister-in-law.
Right.
And Zozo would have us over for dinner. So I got to spend a lot of time with Kwame Ture.
Who was also in his fatigues, right? His little army jacket.
Well, he was rocking African garb by that point. He was mostly rocking the African garb by then. So all of that was a part of that network. So we kind of got politicized together.
Yeah.
We really became a family, and we're all still friends to this day, really.
You go from Third World Press to The Source?
I had a little stint of something in between those, short stint. I taught at the University of Houston and Texas Southern for a semester. And that semester that I was in Houston, I met the folks at The Source and ended up getting hired as the editor.
Talk a little bit to folks who don't know. We were talking earlier, as we always do, about the state of hip hop journalism. And in those early days of hip hop, you might have read something that Nelson George wrote for Billboard.
Yeah.
You might have read something in something like the Village Voice. Independent local weeklies, right, might have someone covering hip hop, just like the radio scene. But the first time we had any sense that there was something called hip hop journalism was this magazine founded by two white guys from Harvard.
Two white guys, two black guys. It was four guys.
Right. We know Dave Mays, right? He's
Dave Mays, John Schechter, James Bernard, and Ed Young. James Bernard also went on to be a program officer at the Rockefeller Foundation. And Ed went on, he's currently one of the folks that's a part of the leadership of the Universal Hip Hop Museum. Yeah. Yeah. So I left the Source. I left the Royal Press. I was in Houston. I wrote this book, the Rap on Gangsta Rap, which Third World Press published. Really was a chapter book. It was one long chapter it was a length of probably I don't think it was more than 15,000 words, something like that. It was maybe 15,000, 20,000 words. So it could have been the equivalent of a few chapters in a book. But I feel like what led me, what I was really reading in those days, in terms of hip hop writing, was I was reading stuff by hip hop that I thought was okay, and that's what made me write about it. I was like, I know more about hip hop than these people. So I was reading. I guess I guys just go all in since we going, right? I was reading Henry Louis Gates and Skip and Houston Baker. Yeah. So Houston Baker had done this book called Black Studies Rap in the Academy, right?
Yes. Right.
And Henry Louis Gates had written some stuff, but more importantly, he was known for being the expert witness in the 2 Live Crew trial. That was 1992. So these were some of the things that started me on this. And I told Skip about that when I was a fellow at the Hip Hop Archive. I don't think he would dispute it now.
No, I don't think he would either.
Yeah. But yeah, so I wrote this book, The Rap on Gangsta Rap, and also, being at Third World Press, I met so many amazing. That's where I met Sonia. That's where I met Amiri. That's where I met Gil Scott Heron. I was Gil Scott Heron's editor for a book that Third World Press published called So Far So Good. Yeah. It was really just some of his lyrics, but it was but he was very particular about which ones he wanted in there, and which ones he didn't. I was Francis Chris Welsing's editor for the ISIS papers, and that was an interesting project. I write about that in. What's your publication that we published?
Oh, New Black Man. Right. When she passed away, you wrote.
New Black Man, that's right.
New Black Man in Exile,
That's right. I was really like, wait a minute, you're a New Black Man.
New Black Man in Exile.
That's what the publication is, right? Yeah, so I wrote, and so also during those years, I met Gwendolyn Brooks. And Haki used to have me drive her to her class that she was teaching. That was a seminar at Chicago State.
What was that shit like?
Man, it was crazy. It was crazy because when he first asked me could I drive her, I thought he just meant just this one day. Because he had asked me to drive people before. Like, he had me pick up Cornel. That's how I met Cornel West. He had me pick Cornel West up from O'Hare Airport and bring him to something they were doing. I can't remember. And so I was just thinking, I'm just going to pick him up. I'm going to pick her up. And so I say, so where am I taking her the day of the thing? He's like, you're going to take her to her class at Chicago State. And then it dawns on me. I'm like, well, how's she going to get home? He said, you're going to wait for her. And I said, well, how long is the class? So like, I'm asking all the wrong questions at the end, right? He's like, the class is 3 hours. So then I'm in Gwendolyn Brooks' poetry writing class.
So at least it was only once a week.
Yeah, just once a week. But we got to be friends in the process. And she told me a lot of things about writing. Yeah. She was very, very, very down. It was like hanging out with your grandma.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Gwendolyn Brooks was just so down to earth, and she would ask me about my day, and she would just be like, and I would be like, she told me once, write. You need to start writing. If you want to be a writer, you got to write. She's like, if you're going to be a saxophonist, you'll be playing the saxophone and you'll be practicing every day. And it's like, well, what am I going to write about? She's like, you can't wait until you have a writing assignment.
Right.
Like, you got to just start writing now. So she's like, get a journal. And as you know, to this day, I walk around with these journals, right? Even when we have events, I'm like, I got a journal with me. So right now, I got this
funny part, and we'll talk about rap sections in a second, right? But there was technology that you could use, MapQuest. Yeah. We driving around in the car, he looking at his little scribbled notes on what corner to turn right and what corner.
Right. So Gwendolyn Brooks, she had an agent that I also interfaced with, a woman named Burl Zitch. Mm-hmm. And Burl was longtime agent, lived in Chicago, and she kind of booked Gwendolyn Brooks events. I had never thought about the intricacies of what it really meant to be a writer before, but this became a part of my consciousness just because I was doing this stuff and interfacing with Gwendolyn Brooks, interfacing with Burl Zitch. And so it was Burl Zitch that put and Gwendolyn Brooks, really, they put the idea in my head that if you wrote something, then you got to go out and speak on it. Yeah. And so that was kind of how I started. So when I wrote the Rap on Gangsta Rap, I started speaking on hip hop and politics at colleges. And in those days, it wasn't really many people. Like, I remember the first people that I knew that were also doing that was like maybe Kevin Powell and Joan Morgan. This is like still the 90s.
Right. I mean, Kevin had a TV show.
Yeah.
Right.
Kevin
He had The Real World.
That's right, The Real World. And then he published that book, Keeping It Real.
Right.
And Joan's book, Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost. That
doesn't come in 1999.
Yeah. So, but this is like, still it's in the 90s. I say the Rap on Gangsta Rap was 94. I started lecturing on it, through the mid 90s. Already, by the time I'm at the source, I've already started doing something. Not a lot, but it still was stuff out there. So yeah, all of that stuff came from those relationships. I started kind of thinking about the things in those ways.
I think the thing that folks most remember about the source when you came on as editor, right? And I would say more so than what it was before, more so than afterwards. I mean, to be clear, the source was kind of the authentic go-to space to find out what was happening in hip hop.
Right.
Vibe launches because of the source, right?
Right.
But Vibe is glossier.
Yeah.
Folks forget it was published in the beginning by Time Warner.
Right.
So Quincy Jones had his hand in it. It
That's
was a
right.
whole different kind of animal.
Yeah.
But one of the things you brought to the source was actually to center Black politics.
Yeah, and that really came out of Third World Press. I mean, I think it was very deliberate. Like, that's why I wanted to be at the source. And a lot of that had to do with when I was at Third World Press, we would do these surveys of our readers. And a lot of the readers weren't younger.
Right.
And so that bothered me. I wanted to work in a place where I was kind of having an impact on my own generation, particularly having been learning from people who were a part of the Black Arts Movement. And I was like, well, how can we do that now? That's what I was always thinking. And so one day I met Lerone Bennett. And Lerone Bennett,
great editor, historian, Ebony Magazine.
Yeah. Lerone Bennett lived in my girlfriend, now my wife. He lived in her building, so I would see Lerone Bennett going up and down on the elevator.
You got a whole Forrest Gump thing happening with your life.
It's pretty crazy, right? So yeah, I would see, and who else I would see around town. If you lived in Chicago in those days, if you was anytime on foot, you would encounter Sam Greenlee. Like, Sam Greenlee would just be around.
Spook who sat beside the door.
Spook who sat by the door. Yeah, and he would talk to you like. So yeah, I feel like these literary folks were very accessible. I mean, I feel like that's something different about what we experiencing now.
Yeah. Folks experience writers on Twitter or IG, but not not in person.
And working at Third World Press, I met Dr. Ben. I met Terry McMillan working at Third World Press. I met B.B. Moore Campbell, Mari Evans. Who was I thinking of? John Henry Clark. Jacob Crothers, Anderson Thompson. These people were having white supremacy conferences on the Columbus Day. This is in the 80s. They were already doing this. So instead of people offer work for Columbus Day, they're like, yo, we're having a white supremacy conference at Malcolm X College. Yeah. That was normalized very early. Yeah, that was normalized and also Donda West was someone else who I met during those years. She was working with Haki at Chicago State along with Gwendolyn Brooks. Yeah. So that kind of was some of the orientation, and then I was doing the Rap on Gangsta Rap. I ended up at the Source, and so at the Source, I had talked to Lerone Bennett prior to that about, well, what about Ebony, and what about? And he's like, man, you got to find so that's what he said. What is it? What's the publication that your generation is reading? That was
right. Don't try to bring that to Ebony.
That's right, and that's when the light kind of came on. So then I kind of started pursuing the Source, but I wasn't able to reach them and be effective. I sent them stuff. I tried to connect with them, but then finally somebody got the bug in their ear, and then they found me. So then I went to work at the Source. That was 95, and The Source had just had this big staff walkout.
Right.
So it was an earlier generation of Source magazine editors, the people like John Schechter and James Bernard. There was another brother whose name I can't think of right now, who was also very, God, I can't think of what his name is. The two of them formed XXL later on.
Right.
Man, I can't recall his name right now. It's terrible. But anyway, that's just so we are 57. But so I went to the Source, kind of, in the aftermath of this staff walkout. It's kind of a blessing in disguise in some ways, because I felt like the earlier Source staff, they were a little bit, they were younger when they started,
But they're gotten a little older.
yeah, well, and they were just closer to they were closer to just the celebrity aspect. So that was one of the things we tried to shift.
Right.
So it was a time for a reset.
Yeah.
So we kind of look at the things that weren't working. It was bad in some ways because some of those writers were amazing and I wanted to work with them. But because they had been a part of the walkout,
Right.
the owner was like, the publisher was like, I'm not messing with certain people he wasn't messing with no more.
Okay.
Which was terrible because they were great writers.
Writers.
Yeah. And so they had done some political stuff, but it wasn't as, I was adamant that I wanted something in there always. And so that's what we started doing. And we ended up creating a national affairs department. Mm-hmm. And when I left being the editor, I just totally went full time in on that. So that was how we started doing that stuff. One of the things that we did then was when Tupac was killed, I got Sonia Sanchez to interview Afeni Shakur. That was one of the big moments for me there. When Geronimo Pratt got out of prison, I interviewed him, one of the first interviews he did when he got out after 27 years. That was a big deal. I still have the audio recording of it. We only published about, that interview was probably about 30,000 words, man. And I think we published maybe 5,000 words of it. So I got this whole, that's another story. But so that's what the Source, that's kind of how we started doing it. It was really like my looking at the Black arts movement and thinking about, and that's how I really started thinking about hip hop. And that's what really kind of led to what became the hip hop generation.
You make a pivot now 18 years ago, understanding that younger folks aren't reading as much, perhaps. The internet isn't quite the thing it is yet. There's no social media really for us, but you launched Rap Sessions.
Yeah.
In 2006, right?
2005.
2005, right? National town hall meetings, right? Traveling around the country. We were talking earlier in the car. We both got the New York Times alert about Diddy.
Yeah.
And charges of rape and violence against Cassie. And you would do Rap Sessions, and each year would have a theme.
Right.
I did my first one with you.
2007,
2006.
Yeah,
and the theme.
That was the second year.
And the theme was does
hip hop
hate women?
Yeah, that's right. That's really how we got to be friends. Really.
Yeah.
I think too often in our conversations about this, and I know all of us have talked about this before, we get so caught up in policing the artists that we very rarely talk about policing the people who really help circulate this stuff in ways that rappers fundamentally can't.
Yeah. I started Rap Sessions. Rap Sessions was an outgrowth of the National Hip Hop Political Convention.
Right, 2003.
Yeah, we did the Hip Hop Convention in 2004, and it was really some of the lessons from the National Hip Hop Political Convention that led to me thinking about Rap Sessions. One of those things was, as the editor of The Source and as someone who had been out on the lecture circuit, I had started to make these relationships nationally. Yeah. So I knew a lot of people nationally that were booking college events.
Right.
So that was some of the thinking. But also what I knew was there were a lot of people who I knew that were doing amazing work, that when I would go to these college campuses and I would be talking about people our age, and I'd be like, oh, do you know who Jessica Caramore is? Oh, do you know who Mark Anthony Neal is? Oh, do you know? And they would be saying, some of these students would be like, no, I don't know who that is. And so Rap Sessions became a vehicle that allowed me to do multiple things that was important to me. One, pay people something fair for their time to go out and, so we do, we do 10, 12. I think the year you did it, we did 15 cities.
We did. That was a long year.
Yeah. So I mean, like sometimes, people could take that 15, 20 grand and it might be a house down payment. And somebody told me that. I won't repeat who said that.
Well, those days it paid for daycare. Right? It paid for childcare.
Yeah. So that was important to me. But what's also important to me was when we did the convention, we saw a generation of young people that were very, people turned out to the convention. 4,000 people came from 35 states. Some people came internationally. But we were focused on creating and endorsing a political agenda for the hip hop generation. But and we did it with we had a delegate system, much like the way a convention is run, the Democratic or the Republican Party convention. You got delegates who have voting power. And so we kind of had a model in which we did. But some of the fundamentals of how democracy functioned, a lot of the young people didn't really know it. Like one of the things that has happened was civics stopped being taught in the schools. Yeah. And so we realized that, but we also realized that a lot of young people hadn't really started to talk and dig into the nuances of, even though you had a lot of young people who were into hip hop across race, they sometimes hadn't really dialogued across race about anything else. Right. People hadn't really talked about gender. So that's why gender was the first one. Because people didn't really have a gender. A lot of the young people didn't have a gender consciousness.
And this was 2 years after Nelly and Tip Drill and all this stuff is popping off.
So we wanted to kind of build that up. And then the other thing we wanted to do was really, because of the convention, I started to see the importance of a national network. Yeah. And that we needed to be building nationally if we were going to really have an impact on American politics. And we saw that come in different ways prior to and the lead into Obama. And so that was kind of how I started Rap Sessions. And we started in 2005. We're still going. Last year we did a tour on Beyond Kanye and Kyrie, renewing the historic relationship between blacks and Jews. That was met with interesting...
I mean, one of your close friends, you're closer to him than I am, but Adam Mansbach, the novelist, right, has often been a huge part of having those public conversations.
Yeah. Adam was the
one.
And
if you don't know who Adam Mansbach is, he's the one who actually wrote the book that Sam Jackson voiced, Go to Fuck to Sleep.
Yeah.
Right. He actually has written like 7 or 8 other novels, but he's most well known for this kind of children's book.
Yeah, and then after that, he did a thing with Samuel Jackson. It was a PSA that they did on YouTube, Wake the F Up, for the 2012 election. Like, hey, don't y'all going to sleep. Obama's in, y'all getting complacent. So Samuel Jackson read that also. But Adam actually was the person that pushed me to do the Blacks and Jews thing. I was really hesitant to do it. And someone had, Vijay Prashad had tried to get me to do one previously. I think it was a certain moment and it was a certain genius that we were able to kind of put this thing together. Adam wrote the first draft because that's how bad, he's like, we should do this. And I was like, yeah, man, I don't know. And I started calling, some of my folks, and people were like, yeah, I don't think y'all should mess with that. But Adam was kind of adamant about it. And I just kind of felt like, man, we're in our 50s now. Like, if we can't have the real conversation about this now, like, when are we going to do it? Yep. So Adam did a draft. I kind of tweaked it a little bit. And we started sending it out, and we started booking events, and it was interesting. The genius of what Adam did was to suggest. I feel like one of the reasons some of these conversations have fallen flat in the past and backfired on Black folks was that they didn't include Jewish people. So Adam was on it, and Adam was telling me we should have this person, we should have that person. So we also ended up getting some folks who were Black and Jewish. That was also Adam's idea. He's like, people don't understand that they're Black Jews, and what's their stake in this conversation when they both Black and Jewish, we had a brother that agreed that signed on with us who was a rabbi. You know what I'm saying? So we did these events, and we really didn't get a lot of the hate pushback that I thought we were going to get. I was actually kind of surprised. The way people dealt with it was they didn't book it.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like they were, like people were, and this is the thing, like right now we're in this moment where we're really seeing what has been this U.S.-Israeli political lobby, right? That basically partly controls the narrative by scaring people that your own livelihood is about to be threatened, right?
If you're honest. Right?
And so it's almost like a form of censorship that keeps people from having conversations that they know they should have, just because they just don't want to get caught up in the backlash of what might happen if they enter this conversation. So it's interesting the moment that we're in now, because really social media has allowed for a kind of a broader telling of a story, and a younger generation, in all honesty, that I think are so far removed from either the Holocaust, which happened in Europe. I always feel like we got to remind people, right? That was Europeans that were the anti-Semites, right? Not black people. So you know, we're really removed from the Holocaust. We're also even really removed from the creation of Israel. So you got a generation of young people for whom these things mean something different, and they also aren't that well read. And so they don't know some of the intricacies of these history, because I think if they did,
or don't know maps, right? Just don't know where things physically are laid out. Right?
Yeah. So I think that if there was a more of an intricate understanding, we grew up being very acutely aware of the dynamics and how the stuff could backfire, because we saw it backfire on people. And then we saw people that definitely navigated it, like Cornel West. Cornel West actually did a couple of the dates with us.
Right, I remember.
Yeah, so that was fun. And also the brother, the comedian / United Shades of America, Kamau Bell.
Kamau Bell.
Yeah. So we did some good work with that, and I was really proud of it, and I was proud that we did it. And people were very receptive to it.
We're 57 years old. When we hear the word phrase hip hop, rap culture,
right,
it means something very, very specific to us.
Yeah.
When you say hip hop to young people today, it means something totally different.
Yeah. I think we went through a couple of iterations even of what hip hop and rap meant, you know what I mean, to different generations of young people. Different age groups. I feel like the terminology has kind of shifted, you know. I can remember when one age group of young people were calling rap one thing and hip hop something else, and rap was this and hip hop was that. Like there was a distinction. Now that's kind of blurred a little bit.
Hip hop was the culture, rap was the music.
That's right. Yeah, that's kind of blurred a little bit. Yeah, some was commercial, some wasn't commercial. You know, hip hop wasn't commercial, rap was commercial. You know, that was kind of how some of the different changing definitions. But I did a thing with a group of high school students in Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago, and it was I gave a talk at the University of Minnesota, and then afterward, the brother who brought me there had asked me, "Do you mind talking to some high school kids?" So he had told me this weeks before. So it's funny, I ended up spending more time preparing the high school presentation because I had to I wanted to get it right. You know, I don't often talk to high school kids, but I wanted to make it something that was meaningful for them. But I was also very conscious of, you know, when we were younger and people would talk about Malcolm and Martin, and let's say we're a freshman in college, that to us then was like a lifetime ago, but it really wasn't that long ago.
Right.
So this is now 84. We're talking about stuff that had 20 years ago.
Earlier.
Right. Yep. But I can remember how far removed that seemed as I started kind of digging into that history. Like I can remember reading about the Black Panthers for the first time, reading about Geronimo Pratt for the first time, and just thinking, man, I kind of thought of Geronimo Pratt was like a superhero. And then when I met him, Geronimo's he's not that tall. I was like, this you, Geronimo Pratt?
Right. Had been in jail for 20 years.
Had been in jail for 27 years, but he was just an amazing brother though. But I'm trying to think what made me go there.
I'm talking about the students at high school.
Oh, the students, yeah. So the guy asked me to talk to these students. I start preparing, and I'm thinking the students. I need to not think they know my hip hop. You know what I'm saying? Because that's going to be something that's not going to go anywhere. Because there's no way they can know my hip hop when I didn't know something that happened 20 years ago. We talking about something that happened 50 years ago.
Right.
So I entered the conversation by I constructed a thing that I called my hip hop journey, and it was like 11 slides that I had on a PowerPoint, and I kind of took them through my journey by just telling these like anecdotal stories about things that had happened that involved Common and people that they might have heard of. Obama, I had a picture of me and Obama that I took when I gave a talk in Chicago at the Chicago Historical Society. I can't even remember what year it was. That's the other thing about 57, like all this shit.
And I'm thinking it's probably before 2008. I'm thinking.
Yeah. He was running for Senate.
Okay.
He was running for Senate. He wasn't even. He was running for State Senate. Yeah, he wasn't even in Congress yet. So he was running for State Senate, and I was giving a talk at the Chicago Historical Society, and so the sister who brought me, I think the day before, or maybe a few hours before, she's like, a friend of mine who's running for State Senate wants to say a few words before your talk. And it was Obama. So Obama comes up and he says a few words about he's running, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting there just like, because I've been in this situation before. And I'm thinking like, this is just another person running for office. Well, after he did that, and he sat down in the front row and he stayed for the whole thing. That told me everything I needed to know about him.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was one of the images I showed to the students. And so then after that, I'm trying to think of some of the other things that might, I had taken a picture of Common at the Million Man March. And I showed them that picture. So I just almost like kind of like snapshots from things I'd done. I had a picture of Marcy, Dr. Marcelina Morgan, who runs the Hip Hop Archive, and me and Rakim standing in front of the Hip Hop Archive. Okay. I had a picture of Ninth Wonder giving his talk
at the Hip Hop
Archive. That's right. Yeah. And so they had a connection to hip hop, to Ninth Wonder because of hip hop. Right. They know Ninth Wonder's a producer. You know what I'm saying? Right. They know he produced some Jay-Z music, so they can connect to that. So and then I did the thing in which, after I went through my journey, and again, I tried to keep it as short as possible because of the attention span. I think I did about 15, 20 minutes. Then I turned it back on them and I said, okay, now you guys are you're gonna tell me your hip hop journey, and you're gonna be able to come up and you take the mic and you can share your, so that's what we did. And so they started talking about, so I said, you're gonna have three images. When you first met hip hop, and it becomes a part of your consciousness midway through your hip hop journey and where your hip hop journey is now. And so it was fascinating because, of course, many of the stuff they were talking about, I had no idea what it was. One of the things was a white dude named Matty B? Matty B, who was Australian rap. One guy was like, yeah, I went to this Matty B concert, and they talked about Soulja Boy. They talked about, one guy said Michael Jackson. And I was like, well, this is interesting. They talked about Drake. They talked about Kendrick, which I thought was interesting because but one of the kids said like, yeah, I heard something about Kendrick when I was in the 4th or 5th grade. So that right there tells me everything I needed to know about the disconnect. Yeah. So that was something that that helped me just kind of talk with young people about where they are in their hip hop journey. Yeah.
What's your favorite hip hop moment?
My favorite hip hop moment?
Yeah.
Man. That's hard. It's so many. It's just so many, man. It's so many. Like some of them I've man. I feel like the relationship that I developed with Chuck D is been a lot of good hip hop moments. Chuck has called me in the middle of the night, woken me up out of my seat, like, yo, B. And I'm like, This is Chuck D calling me. But okay, look, and then me and Chuck did a talk together in Germany, in Hamburg. That was also another interesting thing. Somebody's and they didn't need no translator neither, because people with serious intellectual institutions training them know they can't just speak one language. And but to go back, when I was at Third World Press, one day I got a phone call from Harry Allen. That might be one of them. Harry Allen called me. When I worked at Third World Press, I did permissions. But mostly the permissions that I did were people trying to get clearance for poetry. Right. So there was I'm trying to remember what that brother's name was. He's an early Black Arts poet, Black Arts illustrator that illustrated some of those Third World Press covers. Man, I'm gonna tell you who it is afterward. But he's under one of these unsung Black Arts people. But anyway, one day I was sitting in my office at Third World Press. I get a call, I pick up the phone, and guys like, I'm Harry Allen. Right. And it's undeniable. If you ever heard Harry Allen's voice, it's not even a question like it's somebody trying to play a joke. It's Harry Allen. Yeah. So he's like, I want permission. We want to publish an excerpt from Francis Cress Welsing's The ISIS Papers for an album.
Fear of a Black Planet.
Yeah. So that was and so I was like, you know Chuck D? He's like, of course I know Chuck D. So then but that was me kind of really like, I'm putting my foot in the water before the baptism. Yeah, I think that's definitely one. Spending time with Yasin Bey, I would say.
Multiple times over
Yeah, that was, I feel like he is, he's a person that really casts a huge shadow. You know what I mean?
I mean, he's a multi-hyphenate, though we rarely talk about him in that way.
He's such a I did a thing with him one time I was at the University of Buffalo, Buffalo State. Oh. And I did a conversation with him. But I met him and Talib, more so Talib, before, again, Third World Press was a pathway, because like I was in conversation with Talib even before Black Star was even a group, because Talib was working at Inkuru Books in Brooklyn, which they later on bought when they had financial trouble. So Talib was working there, but Yasin, and it's funny because he was calling himself Yasin many years before he changed his name. Yeah, he changed it. It was even his email. Right. I was emailing him at Yasin, but he just a pure artist in every sense of the word. Like even sometimes in a negative way. Right. Like sometimes he would just get lost in what he was doing to the point that time didn't matter. And it said a lot about me later, a lot about him to me later on, because like, even through this Gaza thing, like he's been so brilliant, and what he's had to say, and he shared this prayer. I don't know if you haven't seen this, you should see this. He shared this prayer on the internet that was just so powerful. But he just really would just go into these deep, like we would be like waiting to go on stage, let's say. He's drawing, he's just talking about so many different ideas. And one time he starts talking to me about MF Doom. And this is before MF Doom passed. Right. Yeah, so he was the first person to talk to me so deeply about MF Doom. He was like, MF Doom was my favorite rapper. That's what he said. Yeah. So I'm like, if this dude is your favorite rapper, I really need to be listening to this music. Yeah. So stuff like that, I think. Those are it's always the political stuff for me, because I feel like the politics and the fixation on our liberation is just so essential. It's like, none of this other stuff matters. If we can't get the next generation freer than we are, what are we really doing? You know what I'm saying? and our culture is so embraced by so many people all over the world. And I think we got to figure out how to get them to embrace it on our terms and not on their own. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of times people are embracing our culture on their own. And a part of that, James Brown said it, people used to say, you the show, we the show and they the business. Right. Part of it is we're not the business always. We got to be the business more.
It's funny. When we first met, I don't know if you remember this, Tupac conference at Harvard in 2003.
I remember the conference.
Right?
Yeah, I didn't know that was the first time.
That's the first time we ever sat down. And before then,
that makes sense though.
I didn't know how to process you. Mm-hmm. Because I wasn't clear that you even liked rap music. Up to that, because so much of your work was not focused on that part of it, right? It was always the kind of infrastructure, right? And the business side and the political aspects of it, right? Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, give me 3 songs that you think best represent the culture.
See, and this is the other thing about what you're saying is I was a hip hop fan, but I was a hip hop fan, but my heroes were Sonia Sanchez, Amiri Baraka, Hakeem Adabu. And so it's like after that,
right? No hip hop artists, right?
Who's gonna impress you? You know what I'm saying?
That's real. That's real.
John Henry Clark. I'm having conversation with John Henry Clark. Favorite songs?
3 songs that best represent the culture.
Definitely Umi Says.
Okay.
Tomorrow may never come. For you or me, life is not promised. Tomorrow may never show up. For you and me, this life is not promised.
Almost anything by Jay Electronica. I mean, the song with Jay Electronica and Most Def, what was that, Exhibit A or
Exhibit D. Exhibit C is the beautiful one. That's the one I was listening to before I picked you up.
Yeah, I feel like that. Oh, really?
I listen to that like twice a week, 2-3 times a week.
Yeah. I used to get dizzy spells, hear a little ring, the voice of an angel telling me my name, telling me that one day I'ma be a great man, transforming with the Megatron Dawn, spitting out flames, eating whack rappers alive.
So that's like my celebration song. When my son got into Middlebury for his undergrad early admission, I was on an airplane flying to New York City. I get off the plane, and I got this message from him that he's been at and I kind of like jump up in the airport and I start playing this Jay Electronica song. I'm trying to Lauryn Hill. Yeah, Lauryn Hill. That was such a moment. That Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, and I think that Joan's book captures so much of it. The book she did, the 20 years of Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Yeah. But I actually went to Haiti with the Fugees. I don't know if I told you this. Did you? Oh, you didn't know? I didn't know that. Yeah.
While at the source.
Yeah, I was at the source still. Yep. I went to Haiti with the Fugees, me and Selwyn both, and we wrote this article about it while we were there. But a part of that journey was I got to spend a lot of time with Lauryn Hill in some one-on-one conversation stuff. She was pregnant at the time, and there was the big conversation about who's the father. Who's the father? Yeah, yeah. I think that she is just a. I used to think of her because she's so multi-talented, almost like our generation's like Aretha. You know, so she's definitely one of the people that I really hold in very high esteem. I'm trying to think. It's so much, Mark. 3 is like nothing. Scarface, Hand of a Dead Body. I think Scarface is brilliant. Some of Tupac's songs, I think there's something that Tupac did in his music that I thought was probably more brilliant sometimes than even the song. Tupac had a way that he started out a song down here, and he's going higher, higher and higher as he's getting deeper, and he's bringing more energy. It's like it's something that I noticed as a you know, like even in the 90s, even before he was killed, that he had that kind of style. I'm working on a book now on Nipsey Hussle, a biography, and it's interesting because particularly after writing the book with Rakim, yeah. So it's different in so many levels. One, he has so many interviews. I feel like I spent probably a year just getting through the interviews. And by contrast, Rakim hardly did interviews. And so
even after the book came out.
yeah. So when Rakim, a lot of I didn't really have like stuff to mind. It was just him, but I had him, so that made it different.
Right.
But with Nipsey, I feel like there's a lot of interesting layers to him that I feel like people haven't really grasped. One of the things I'll say that caught my attention, I feel like his story, people have really missed what his genius is. And I think a part of it is his ability to work. He valued partnerships, right down to the ownership of things that he did. Like this is something very unique within hip hop. Hip hop groups break up.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, because they mad about people not getting enough money, or somebody getting some more money, or somebody mom is the manager and maybe they didn't cut into the deal. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a part of hip hop history. But with him, that's a form of selfishness, if that's the right word, right? That you don't see a lot. So he partnered in these situations with his friends that he grew up with and stuff. And what's the name? It's interesting too when you start to think about the artists who did it. They've gotten further than other people.
Right.
Queen Latifah did it.
Right.
Homeboy that she grew up with.
Mark the 45 King, right? And then the dude that she ran the company with.
Yeah, dude she ran the company with. Yeah, so like and he's still running.
He's still running.
Yeah. So I feel like it's something to that I feel that we got to tap into more. I think hip hop has reached a real high level of wealth that we never really thought was imaginable. A lot of it has to do with people like Nas, who were ahead of their time, started thinking about investing. So like a lot of stuff that Nipsey talked about, people think, oh, nobody's ever talked about this or done, but people have done this stuff. Right. Yeah. But the way that he partnered, I think that to me was something that was very distinctive about his approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to open it up to the audience if there are any questions. We got a mic coming to you.
This is a web series, so
Fair enough. Well, first of all, thank you so much. This has been a really, really interesting. I was interested. You talked a couple of times about being 57 years old and just kind of your personal evolution. Yeah. I was interested to hear about your thoughts about like kind of like the evolution of hip hop, especially when so many people were like, it's kind of a young people's thing. How you're able to engage in it.
I mean, for me, I would say.
Does your son listen to hip hop?
No, my son listened to hip hop as a child.
And the hip hop that he listened to music, hip hop that you were listening to. Yeah, he listened to music
with me. I'm gonna tell you, one of his favorite songs was Outkast. I'm trying to remember what that song was. It wasn't the Rosa Parks.
Bombs Over Baghdad.
No. So Fresh and So Clean.
So Fresh and So Clean. Okay.
Yeah, he loved that song.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I feel like my answer to that was always that we're thinking about hip hop in the wrong way, to think of it as a young people's music. That's the music industry. The music industry advances the idea that it's young people's music. I feel like for me, it was a generation's music. So I think of hip hop as a generational phenomenon, and that's how I write about it. Yeah. It's a generational phenomenon, and I feel like, interestingly, it's a generational phenomenon now that cuts across several generations, and those generations are living and experiencing it in different ways. Yeah. So I don't let young people shut me out of it.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting because as you said that, like I'm imagining, and I'll just use that as an example, if you had the choice 25 years ago to listen to a 30-year-old Branford Marsalis or 58-year-old Sonny Rollins, who you going to listen to?
Yeah.
And we don't think the same way about, well, pop music in general, but definitely hip hop. We don't think about it in the same way.
Right.
I mean, that's why, what I appreciate, and I'm not the biggest Nas fan.
I'm a big Nas fan.
Right.
I'm surprised I didn't tell you no Nas songs. That song he raps backwards, that shit is bananas. Do you know what I'm talking about? He raps the whole song backwards. I was like, this is brilliant. What's that song called? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Man, that song is crazy.
But what I appreciate about Nas, right? We've never seen an artist have a late career resurgence.
Yeah, not like this.
Like him.
But he was still he consistently was present, partly because he was a good investor. He invested in a lot of good stuff.
So he didn't have to be out there.
He wasn't. The music wasn't the only way that he was making money. So, but yeah, I think that his partnership with Hit Boy has been very interesting. And I think to me, it says more about Hit Boy than it does about Nas. Because I mean, Nas is still making brilliant music.
Right.
But Hit Boy wanted to be connected to the genius that was Nas, right? And he found a way to do that in a way that made it mutually beneficial. Sure. So I feel like the younger generation got a great. I mean, I met it's a young brother that I know. I mean, I have young brothers that I talk to about music and other things because I think that it's important. This brother's 27. I've known this dude for like 4 or 5 years. I actually took him up to the hip hop archive. He's a chef.
Okay.
But he hated Nas. I mean, he hated Nas. He's like, yeah, this music is it's old, it's terrible. The music is terrible. And I mean, and I just listen, I'm just listening. But when Hit Boy produced him, he was like, oh my God, Nas is amazing. He's like, yeah, Nas is amazing. And so he's like, I was like, oh, so you like Nas? He said, yes, because Hit Boy made him relevant. Yeah.
I asked a question about your son, because the only contemporary stuff I listen to now is if I'm in the car with my 21-year-old now.
Yeah.
My 21-year-old daughter, and she wants to listen to this stuff. It's like, and I have to do so, and we've talked about this without offering judgment.
Yeah.
That they're not making the music for us to listen to,
they
right?
really
And so to talk to my daughter about what do you actually find of value in this? How is this connected to you, right? And in the same way, I think our parents dealt with us.
Right, absolutely.
When we were listening to rap in the 1980s, and they're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think my son is into classical music, but my son is just very, he's just a careful kind of observer, and it was clear he didn't want to do anything that me or my wife did. Like he wanted to do his own, he wanted to do something totally different, his own thing.
So he wasn't going to be a physician, he wasn't going to be writing.
No. He started writing as a young person, but he just kind of like, I'm going to do something different. And so the music I felt kind of, but he also is into like individual type. He's an only child.
Right.
So he's into these individual pursuits. He swims, plays the piano.
Flies airplanes.
Flies airplanes. Like all this stuff that's just he does by himself. Yeah.
I'm very thankful to be here tonight. I've learned a whole lot. And I'm most impressed by the fact that I'm from the generation that I didn't allow my children to listen to rap music.
Is that your mom, Wilhelmina?
Because it was just too crazy, and it was just going against everything, and it was just going to get us in trouble.
Right.
But now, since growing, and I've learned that there's such a thing as good trouble and bad trouble. And a lot of good things have come out of the music.
Yeah.
And my question goes back to, what is the difference between rap and hip hop?
Okay.
Because now when you say this, I go back to the movie For Love and Basketball. And they were talking about that little bit about hip hop. But then it seems that it just separated.
Yeah.
And when did that divide come, and how does it come back together?
Yeah, I feel like it's back. Don't you feel like people kind of talk
You know,
about
it's
change?
Because I'm
you
from
know,
that generation that's still not listening.
I think there's always been kind of like a thought that hip hop was a culture.
That's right.
And that rap was the musical component of the culture, right? So you got rap, you got graffiti, you got B-boy, boy, B-girl, and that whole deal. I don't think any young folks, you know, if they're listening to 21 Savage or what's her name, Sexy Red, or I don't think they call that rap music. I don't think rap music is the lexicon that young people describe what that is. I think they're more likely to name it hip hop if they name it anything, because for them it's just pop music at this point.
I think it is. I think it's mostly pop music. But in terms of what you're saying, I do think that, like Mark has said, you know, there was a period where people said rap music is the music of hip hop culture, and then there was another period in which people said rap is commercialized hip hop music. Right. So hip hop was real hip hop. That was real, and then rap was
a Tribe Called Quest was hip hop, and Diddy was rap.
And then I think after those iterations, it seems to kind of like go all over the place. I feel like we're in a period now in which, like a lot of, you know, I think one of the things that shifted is when it was less artists. And you were getting published on a record label and things of that nature. We kind of knew most of the people. So I feel like, and when there were these mediums, like there was radio, there was less mediums, less choices.
Right.
We kind of had more of what I call a national unified culture. Right. So that we all were talking about and listening to the same stuff. So it made us more unified in the way we thought and talked about it. And I feel like now, as we even have migrated even away from albums, like people, you know, like that's one of the interesting things about this Nipsey Hussle book is I realized writing this book and really doing a deep dive into Nipsey Hussle's music that a lot of young people who were his fans didn't listen to his music. They listened to singles.
Right.
They knew a single here, they knew a single there, but they don't really know Nipsey's music. I mean, one of the interesting things about Nipsey Hussle that never has gotten talked about amongst young people is how heavily invested his music is in misogyny. Yeah. It's just not even mentioned. Yeah. It's not you. So when I encountered it, I was almost kind of like, well, how's this not? How's nobody talking about this? So yeah, I think that it's been an evolution, and young people are, you know, I feel like a lot of younger people now who are on college campuses that I'm interfacing with at Buffalo, I see a lot of younger people who are more invested in, and this may be something that's come out of social media. They're more vocal. They're more willing to talk about things they don't necessarily know about, and they give more power to what their personal experience and what they think is, and they're not necessarily interested in putting that in conversation with what
anything else
some authority is saying.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I feel like this is a part of why we're seeing this kind of different conversation around Israel and Gaza. In my opinion, I think it's younger people who are valuing what they think. And what they think is...
And what they feel.
Yeah, and what they feel. And what they feel is, you know, if we're supposed to be about human rights and we're supposed to be about democracy, we're not seeing that in this scenario. And we don't care what Joe Biden is saying, and we don't care what Congress is, how much money they trying to send, and what kind of weapons we care about what we know. And what we know is we see something wrong happening, right. You know?
Hello, how you doing? This is a very hip-hop question for you. Who is on your top 5 list?
My top 5 list. See, I have a hard time with questions like that. Because I feel like, one of the things I would say is this. I feel like we gotta almost have that conversation in a different way, because I almost feel like it's unfair to put artists from different eras in conversation with each other. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll give you an example. Let's take Drake and Rakim, right? Rakim is 17 when he gets a record deal, okay? He's not even old enough to be in the club when he goes to the Latin Quarter. Not even old enough to be in there. Drops out of high school, this is 1986, to go on tour with, I think, LL Cool J, Public Enemy, I can't remember which.
Houdini, probably.
Yeah. So it's like, so he's in these clubs and stuff, it's wild. So I feel like what he did in 86 when hip hop is barely 10, 12, 14 years, right? Compared to Drake having decades of music to listen to, right? To me, that's harder. You're more almost creating something out of nothing at that point. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's kind of unfair, but people do like, they compare these, like, I feel like comparing, say, Foxy Brown and Meg Thee Stallion. You know, and you know, Foxy Brown, I mean, some of this, I mean, the stuff that they were doing was brilliant, but I think the other thing that also changes is the fans have changed. What the fans expect from the music is different. That then affects the product. You know what I'm saying? Like, if the fans just want singles, then the artists don't really have to think about a conceptualization of an entire album. You know what I mean? I just feel like it's different. If the fans don't value lyricism, right? You know, I feel like an earlier generation of hip hop, lyricism was important to the fans. You know what I'm saying? You know, like, lyricism was important to us because we connected that lyricism to a certain intellectualism. And there was a generation of black folks valued education. Black folks value knowledge. Like, that was, and it didn't matter if you even had an education. Neither one of my parents even graduated from high school, but they made us go to college.
Because you wouldn't go to a church to hear a mumble preacher. No. I mean, just to be honest, right? You would not sit there for 2 hours every Sunday to listen to a mumble preacher.
That's funny, a mumble preacher.
But your top 5.
You want me to talk about this top 5? I don't think I really have a top 5. I mean, there's so much brilliant
you've
music.
probably been asked that question hundreds of times.
I have been. I mean, I think it's a lot. I like
what's your top 5 today at this moment?
I don't have no top 5. I'm gonna tell you some songs that I like. I think that's a better way to talk about it.
Okay.
Do you know the song that Talib Kweli did with Asheru, Mood Swing? You know this song?
I do not know that.
Oh, God, this song is crazy.
Tell me what you stand for. Will you settle for less, or do you have the strength to demand more? Only time will tell what this new world brings. Revolutions in order. Check the mood swing. Swing, 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 swing. No, like sweet chariot.
Do you know this song? Oh, my God. I'm trying to remember which Talib album it's on. Talib's album. Beautiful Struggle?
I would remember if it was.
No, maybe it wasn't Beautiful Struggle. It's a song that Talib did with Asheru called Mood Swing, and it samples a what's the jazz song? Dun 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 dun. What's that? Is that sentimental mood? Is that what that is? In a sentimental mood. So yeah. So
he did it with who?
Asheru. Remember, Asheru is he's the guy who does the theme song for the Boondocks.
Oh.
You know that song, I Am the Stone That the Builder Refused, right? That's Asheru. Asheru is a high school teacher from Washington, D.C. I don't know how him and Talib linked up, but he's a crazy lyricist.
Okay.
So that's one of my favorite songs. I mean, it's just so many. It's so many. Biggie, Niggas Bleed. That's one of my favorite songs. It's not political. But the lyricism is crazy. I'm trying to think. The lyricism stuff, that's what drew me to hip hop. So it's like that to me, like if it doesn't have lyricism, it doesn't have depth, it doesn't have complexity.
And that's a difference between us, because it's actually the music that drew me.
Yeah, it wasn't
the
really
sample stuff is what drives me.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Yeah, I think you're right about that. Samples sometimes, but if the lyricism isn't crazy, and you know, I majored in English and I did a master's in English. So like that's what made me see the value in hip hop. I thought it was brilliant that these young people who were sometimes not even out of high school had such a fine connection to so many aspects of what language is, metaphor, simile. And then like with Biggie, he's stretching and chopping words. Yeah. You know, like stretching a word out or like making it shorter. You know what I'm saying? Like rhyming something with something that don't really rhyme, but making it sound like it does rhyme. Jay-Z, I think, is you know, has a lot of moments of that. I think he's a brilliant lyricist that's really careful about it. It's a song that he does with Jay Electronica called "We Made It." You know this song? You know it.
Yeah.
Because I think you was the first one that.
It's not on the album.
Oh, it's not on the album.
It's not on the album. I think they did that as like a
live
free. I know they did a live freestyle in Brooklyn.
That's crazy. That's a crazy song.
A million niggas love me cause I'm ill. The greatest story ever told, niggas in the field. From Solomon to Sambo to Django, it's fact. I'm the Farrakhan of rap and I get it from the wheel. The son of WD, who hung around in the deep, who ran around in the street. The trap gods raised me, face all on the Sphinx, story all on the wall of the pyramids. Niggas know the black god saved me.
I was a big KRS-One fan early.
I was too.
Yeah, because because of the lyricism. And because he was teaching. You know, KRS-One had a song where he raps about Elijah Muhammad, how to eat to live. Like that was like, and then I became vegetarian.
Madam CJ Walker made the straightening comb, but you won't know this if you weren't shown. The point I'm getting at, it might be hard, is we're just walking around brainwashed. See what I'm saying? It's not to diss a man. We need the 89 school system, one that caters to a black return, because you must learn.
You mentioned KRS-One, and so I got to bring this up. As someone who had to sit down and talk to artists, right? And I'm throwing this out there about KRS-One because, you know, if you've never met KRS-One and never had a conversation with KRS-One, there's a big gap between what you might experience on any given day with KRS-One and what you thought about him as an artist, right? Are there any artists that you came in contact with that were just fundamentally different than what you ever thought they would be?
I don't know. I don't know about that. That were different. I think Talib.
Even disappointing.
Oh, disappointing. I had some conversations with some artists that I probably will let remain nameless. I did an article once that I called the Cotton Club. It was about black political artists and their in their white audience. So it was a period in which these conscious artists were making this conscious music for black folks. But when they would have a concert performance, it would be mostly white kids in the audience. So I call it the Cotton Club. So some of the artists one of the artists I interviewed for that piece was like, yeah, it's true, but I'm not going on the record saying that. So that was kind of bizarre. Another artist who I like that I would say another song. I mean, I feel like, and again, lyricist, Bun B. I mean, like Bun B and them on that song with Jay-Z, Big Pimpin', it's great. But Bun B, you know, I interviewed Bun, and Bun talked about how what he wanted to represent was he wanted to carry himself like a blues man. And so, and when you think about it, right? He from Port Arthur, Texas, you know, and Port Arthur, Texas is in this real kind of bizarre part of the country. You know what I mean? It's almost like no man's land, right? And so he talked about, you know, learning music and stuff as a young person and how he met Pimp C and stuff. But he also talks about when he thought about a rap persona, he wanted to carry like a blues man. He's kind of a big guy, you know what I mean? And you see that in his voice. Sense. His voice is that, you know what I mean?
I mean, Scarface is a blues
Scarface man. Is kind of a blues man too. And he's from Texas. So maybe it's a Texas thing. But Bun, I think, is a fascinating, underwritten about and an analyzed hip hop artist. So those are some of the artists that I like. It's so many though. It's really an unfair question. It's an unfair question.
Hello again. I have two follow-ups to things that you said, anecdotes that you had. One, you talked about going to the source and like how having a political lens was important to you, and also reaching a younger audience. I wondered if you could just talk about that process and if you felt that that was achieved. And then you also talked about When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost, Diary of a Hip Hop Feminist, and like just kind of gender themes in hip hop. And I wondered if you could just speak on how you attack it in your own work, and then how you see it across the lens of like other academics and writers.
I'm lost in that question. It's like 3 questions in there. Give me the first one. The first one was about reaching young people with politics and at the source. You know, one of the interesting things about being at the source was when I got to the source, I was the oldest person there. I was 27. Everybody was younger than me. Yeah, this is fascinating. It's a fascinating thing when you think about it. And these were a lot of very amazing and talented young people that went on to do brilliant things. Some of them never went to college, just brilliant people who were bold, innovative, and the source kind of gave people space. It's really almost a lesson in how to create a meaningful work environment. One of the things the source did was the source wasn't really strict on the clock. So like as long as you got your work done, nobody really cared. And as long as you had your work done, as long as you showed up for staff meetings, you could just do whatever you wanted to do, really. And so most people had another hustle. And that's what they would say, you know, I got my other hustle. But it was always something within the music industry. Mm. So like, you ever seen the MTV, the first thing that Beyonce is in as an actress, Carmen, a hip opera. The person that wrote that worked at the source. He was somebody that was close with the publisher. I don't even remember what he did at the source, to be honest with you. I'm trying to remember what he did at the source. I think he kind of like, he kind of did like hands-on, like personal stuff that Dave needed around the business of the source, the advertising. Yeah. So he was an interesting dude. So I just feel like people were multi-talented and they did a lot of interesting stuff. We had a column called Unsigned Hype, and it was something that nobody really liked to do. We would get these unsolicited CDs in the mail that people had made their own music and they weren't signed and they were trying to get signed. And then we had a column that wrote about the artist. It was really fascinating because never have I seen something that so little attention was paid to that ended up having such a huge impact. You know what I'm saying? And so people would we would get these CDs in the mail. They sent them to random editors. And so we had a big refrigerator box with the top cut off. And you get something labeled Unsigned Hype, throw it into that box. Now, the one thing was there was the seriousness enough to throw it into that box. So I got to say, because I mean, you could have just been a real complete jerk and threw it away, but people didn't do that. They cared about the culture too much. So you throw it into this box, And so finally we got this kid who was in high school. He was 16 or 17 at the time, who would come by after school. He was a crazy hip hop head from Spanish Harlem. And he would dig and listen to he would dig through these things. He would just sit there. He didn't even have an office. His office was in the hall. I mean, his desk was in the hallway. He would sit there and he'd put on his headset and listen to this music. And he was listening to this music like it was the most important thing that he was ever going to do in his life. Wow. Yeah. He's now a vice president at Atlantic Records. He pulled Eminem out of that box. Wrote the review of Eminem's Unsigned Hype, and later on, Eminem hired him as his director of A&R, and he went on to have an amazing career in the hip hop industry. His name is Rigoberto Morales. So it was just amazing young people like that. They were around and they were doing amazing things. But in terms of the gender piece, I hope I really answered that question. I mean, I feel like in terms of the politics, I mean, as I've moved through life, over the years, I encountered people who really value the politics that we put. I mean, like we did things like we covered Black political prisoners. There's so much stuff we did. We had Khalid Muhammad featured in the magazine at one point. A lot of stuff like that we did. But in terms of the gender piece,
I mean, I think to jump in here, I mean, the rap sessions tours, you know, because we're hanging out before. We go on stage, and sometimes there's all kinds of fireworks on stage, and then we have to debrief afterwards. So, you know, at least for that one, you know, does hip hop hate women? You know, it's me and Bakari, it's Tracy Sharpley White, it's Joan Morgan,
Raquel
Rivera,
sometimes
Elizabeth Mendez-Berry, right? And so there were many come to Jesus moments. After the comments on the panel, that we had to grapple with, right? Because, you know, we would literally be in another city 3 days later,
right,
continuing the same conversation.
Yeah, that requires a book of its own. I remember one of those side conversations that you were not there. It was I can't remember what it was. Something I did with MC Search and Rosa Clemente. Yeah. We almost had to pull them apart at the dinner table. We had the dinner afterward. I can't remember what they was arguing about. But yeah, that was kind of bizarre. So yeah, I feel like the gender dynamics in hip hop are very interesting. I feel like as much as people talk about the underrepresentation of women in hip hop, I feel like often the women are so amazing that's present. I feel like it's under discussed. I mean, I understand why people say it, but even within you got Queen Latifah. You know what I'm saying? Queen Latifah is like worth how many male MCs?
Yeah.
And like Rose, that's what I feel like. I always feel like if I'm doing something with Rosa Clemente and people are like, oh, we got a gender imbalance on the panel, I'm like, Rosa is about to murder everybody up here.
I mean, because if you think about who Latifah's male peers could be.
Yeah.
Right? The music, the stage, and all that kind of, you know, maybe you put LL in that conversation, but LL ain't the actor that Queen Latifah is.
No.
Right? Maybe I mean, when you think about folks who've done the acting piece, right?
Yeah.
None of these folks have done it on Broadway also, right? So she really is peerless in that regard.
Yeah, she kind of is peerless. And that, was it Ma Rainey's?
Right.
That film? The film, was it Ma Rainey's? Was that what did she play?
No, it's the film about Bessie Smith.
Bessie Smith.
It's the Bessie Smith, the HBO film Bessie Smith, right?
Oh my goodness.
Right.
Now, only thing is maybe Most Def.
Right. Right. But his stuff hasn't had the impact.
No, it hasn't had the same impact. But that film, Something the Lord Made.
Yeah. Well,
everybody needs to see that. Everybody needs to see that. But in terms of the gender thing, I feel like the women that I've been around in hip hop have been amazing, and I never felt that there was any deficit. I didn't experience that. Maybe I was just, even when I was at the Source, we had Tracy McGregor, we had Akiba Solomon, we had Mimi Valdez, we had June Ambrose. So I never, I understand why people say it. And I think the other thing, and it's probably not even what people would be considered politically correct to say. I think people forget. This is my privilege of not being a traditional scholar. I'm sure y'all have seen this already on display tonight, but people forget that Black men needed a space. You know what I'm saying? Like, when hip hop emerged, young Black men needed a space. They needed to be able to have a voice. They needed that. And so there were, definitely it was more men, right? But there is, I think, and if you really go intricately through the history, there are often more women than people remember. You know what I'm saying? Like, you start going through, like, what's her name did this work? Akua Naru has the thing she did called, when she did the Hip Hop Fellowship, she started something called The Keepers that kind of documents women in hip hop. She's reminding me of women in hip hop that I had even forgotten. Like, we talking about the 70s. Right. We talking about the 80s. like women were very present. I did that thing with the sister. I mentioned Half Pint.
Mm-hmm.
Half Pint was down with the Bomb Squad. You know what I'm saying? It's like women were present. They were strong, and they were representing.
Yeah.
That's been my experience. Yeah, I think they were strong. They were present. They were representing. People want to see more women. I understand that, but I also think that I kind of sometimes feel it's kind of like diminishing the impact that the women were having.
Right.
Like when we did the National Hip Hop Political Convention, and this is the thing. Like these women are not wallflowers. You know what I'm saying? The women that are rolling in these hip hop circles, they'll check you. So, I mean, it's not like they like, oh, y'all are doing this to me. Oh, y'all do no, I didn't experience that.
There were some times where we had to keep Joan from jumping across the table.
Yeah.
Right, to come at
Joan,
some dude who said something crazy.
Yeah. Rosa.
Oh, definitely Rosa.
Lisa Fager.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But I can remember, so I feel like the women were, when we did the National Hip Hop Political Convention, for example, it was the women that was like, yo, we need a women's caucus. Like, I think one of the best lessons you can learn as a man is with women telling you they need something, just shut up and let them do what they let them do what they feel that they need. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's half the battle. I've been married for 28 years because I shut up and do what she say. She like, this is what I need. So that's what you need. You know what I'm saying? The women said they needed a women's caucus. So we said we're gonna have a women's caucus. You know what I'm saying? We could be stupid and be like, oh, there's no need for that. Like, we don't know that. People know what they need. Give people what they need.
Thank you all for coming out this evening.
And ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to take a moment. I wanted to surprise you with this, Dr. Neal. This year, Left of Black was nominated for the Webby Award. This is a very special year for us. And this came in, and I wanted to present this to you. This is the 2023 official nominee of the Webby Awards.
Wow.
We did not win the Webby Awards, but you got to remember we were in contention against Al Jazeera, against the BBC, against Stanford University. They had a show, and we were able. So we didn't quite get there, but just to be a nominee was a wonderful.
Yeah, this is amazing. This is amazing.
Thank you. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you all for coming tonight.
Blacks, they be hyping, I'm the light that lit your match. A black watch for all the times I watch MTV raps. Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black, everything black. Culture over everything, y'all, we taking it back.